Good day, and welcome to today's webinar, Testing NodeJS, REST APIs, MongoDB, and with UFT. Next slide. Today's webinar is brought to you by Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Next slide. Today's webinar is hosted by Bernard Shimshak, that's me. I'm the Ohio chapter leader for Vivid. I'm also the Hewlett Packard Special Education Chair, and I am the Software Education SIG leader for the Testing Quality and Application Lifecycle Management SIG. Next slide. Today's presenters are brought to you by Ori Bendet. He's an inbound product manager for Hewlett Packard Enterprise. He's currently the Bendet for HPE and handling the executive scorecard, Storm Runner, and Load Runner. And we also have Yossi Neiman. He's a technical group leader for UFT. Yossi's been with HPE since 2008, and he's always been in the field of functional testing. Next slide. Today's live session is intended for all Vivid members. The session is going to be recorded and posted on the webinar section of the Vivid website, and all members can view it afterwards. Additionally, today's slide deck will become available for you. We'll send it out to you via the email link once it has been posted to the Vivid website. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. Next slide. And here you see a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel as it appears in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So to submit a question, just go ahead and type it into the questions pane. If you don't quite see it, just see the question, just click the little sign there and that'll expand it out there for you. And then you'll be able to see the pane and type them in as you go. All right, next slide. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ori Bendet. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. My name is Ori Bendet, and as Bernard said, I'm the inbound product manager for HPE's Unified Functional Testing, also known as UFT. Also here with me is Yoni Neiman, who is the technology group leader for UFT. Along this session, what we are going to do is we are going to have, in addition to this webinar's question pane, we're going to have a live Twitter feed. So make sure that in case you have any questions, try and use the hashtag UFT webinar during this session, and we'll answer your questions. Okay, so let's start. What do we have for today's agenda? So we will start by talking about the market dynamics and trends. We will then cover the complex application architecture. We will talk about the pros and cons of testing at each of the different layers, share our best practices, talk a bit about the Hewlett Packard Enterprise Advantage, and of course show you a live demo of how you can test a complex application using UFT. So in the new style of IT, where we have the mega trends, which are mobile, cloud, agile, and DevOps, we need to make sure that our applications are answering this demand. It meaning that we need to make sure that our application is getting faster to the market. We want to make sure that it increases the brand of our the value, of our brand. We want to make sure that the retention and attraction of the customer increases, and of course, we want to reduce the cost. All of these mega trends are affecting and creating the modern application development, which affects the entire life cycle. And regarding the life cycle, if we focus for a minute on today's testing challenges, so today as testers, we need to test as early as possible in the cycle. Our execution time is critical. We need to find and to provide feedback in a matter of minutes rather than in a matter of days or hours in the whole world, which means that our test must run as part of our continuous integration or continuous deployment. Because of today's mobile and the variety of devices and the bring your own device, we need to make sure that our applications are working on multiple platforms, devices, languages, and etc., which makes it almost impossible to cover the entire permutations of the testing metrics. In today's world of the rapid development, we have a shorter cycle, which means that we get a shorter than ever stabilization time, if any at all. We are familiar with companies and applications that are releasing a new version every couple of minutes, meaning that testing must be done immediately. Our applications are becoming more complex and fragmented than ever. Our users, however, are still expecting nothing less than perfect, and the user experience expectations have risen over the last couple of years. And the last bullet is the increased usage of third-party integration, such as the different APIs for Twitter, Facebook, PayPal, Amazon Web Services, and so on and so forth. Complex application architecture. So let's take a look at a retailer's real-life scenario. So at first, it might look as a very simple and easy flow to cover. So we have our shopping app, which can be either web or mobile. But however, once we start drilling in, then we need to find out what is the user type. Which operating system is using, whether is accessing this from the mobile or from a web browser. Afterwards, once the customer tries to log in, then we need to make sure what is the geographical location of the user. And we also want to verify and to understand which type of network connection is our users are using, whether it's a Wi-Fi, LAN, 3G, 4G. We want to see whether the query is single or multiple. And then once we finish and we check out the card, then we need to make sure that the data is saved accurately. And in addition, of course, we need to make sure that it's actually secure. And was the service available and at what cost? And at last, because we are testing the functional aspect, we need to make sure that it actually works and the functional requirement was met. So if we drill in one level down into today's complex application, then we can simplify it into three different layers. On the UI layer, we have the actual UI, which is the graphical user interface, where today it can be desktop, mobile, tablet. In today's smart watches, it can be Internet of Things. It can be also sensors and beacons, and the variety of devices and platforms. On the middle part, we have the service layers, which is the APIs of the system. It can be REST APIs, or it can be web services. And on the bottom part, we have the storage layer, which is usually the database where all of the information is being saved. So just a quick overview of the most common UI frameworks today. We have Angular and Bootstrap and Pure CSS and Backbone and Ember. And on the service layer, we have the REST APIs, as I already said, web services, JavaScript, XML. And on the storage layer, we have Mongo, Cassandra, Postgres, the good old Microsoft SQL Server, and the Oracle database. We'll now go over the different testing layers and what is the pros and cons of each of one of them. So the UI testing, which is the most common and most straightforward. So the pros, it means that you are testing the actual interface as the real user. You are covering the real business flows. You can easily cover it in a manual testing session. You don't need any other preparation other than preparing your application to be tested. If you are automating your UI flow, then you can automate it once and then you can run it all the time. In addition, it covers application areas that are not being covered in unit testing, and you can easily detect differences between the different platforms, browsers, and devices. On the bad side, then we have the UI stability, meaning that in today's rapid cycles and development, the UI is usually the last thing that is being stabilized. So you might work on something that is yet to be changed, and you will require further testing. The maintenance of a UI object in case of change for automation script is something that can be very hard and can take a lot of time. So you also need to take that under consideration. And of course, as I already talked, there is the support metrics, which is ever increasing in today's world, whether we have the operating system, whether it's Windows, Linux, Mac, and so on. And in the browser, we have Chrome, Safari, Firefox. And of course, in the mobile, we have the different devices, whether it's Android, iPhone, and the different platforms, the Android, the Mac, the iOS, etc. And in general, the execution time of a UI test is something that is taking longer compared to an API test. But when I'm testing the UI of my application, what am I actually testing? So in the UI of my application, I usually have the HTML5 and the CSS3. In the middle, I have the service interface, which is usually REST, SOAP, and the response is usually JSON. But on the bottom part, and this is what I want to demonstrate, I have the rest of the technologies, whether it's a Java IoT, a NodeJS, NGX, Fix, Swift, etc. And it's meaning that when I'm testing the UI of my application, I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg, and I have a whole lot to test that is not visible for my eyes in the UI. So moving on to API. So here you can see the current state of protocols for the API. So you can see that the most common one with 70% is REST APIs, and by a far margin is the SOAP, which is the web services. And this is according to Programmable Web, which is a website that is a library for all of the public APIs that are available today. So in today's world, we are saying that the UI-less testing is on the rise. We are having our APIs, microservices, architectures, Internet of Things, sensors, and beacons. And today, we know that teams are required to test early in the cycle, even when the UI is not ready. According to the World Quality Report, 20% state that they want to involve testers earlier in the cycle. We have the public APIs and the API business model that is being exposed as part of the product, or you can even have the entire product as a complete API without even a graphic user interface. And according to Programmable Web, we have a rise of more than 50% in the public APIs available. And this is today. And tomorrow you can test an application that doesn't even have a monitor. Just think of how you are going to test a beacon that is monitoring the temperature of your house. So you won't have any UI, and you will probably need to access it from the API layer. You have single page apps that the UI remains the same, but the content is being changed according to the API call. You have, as I already said, APIs that will become the actual product, and we have the IoT, which is the Internet of Things, and computing everywhere, where the entire communication will be done solely on the API. So testing at the API level. This can be done earlier in the cycle, as the API is something that should be finalized and not broken constantly. You can provide early feedback for the core business logic. It should be more stable than the UI, and API shouldn't break as constant as the UI of your application, even in development cycle. If you are using several devices and platforms, so the same service should be used across all of the different devices, and this means that you can use one test to cover the API and then complete the device-specific test later once the UI is being stabilized. API tests run much faster than UI tests because it's simply an HTTP request and response, which should take a matter of a millisecond. You can use it for a quick data population and then not run on an empty system, but use the API to populate your application. And you can test and validate functionality that might not be exposed in the UI, but still exist. On the cons, then testing the API requires a more technical skill set. You need to understand what is the request, what is the response, what are the parameters. It's harder to build a business flow because you don't have the actual UI that tells you what you can do. So you're testing actually without the business context, and you still need to test the actual UI once it's available. So moving on to the database testing. So here is an overview according to dbengines.com that shows the top databases in today. So we have Oracle, MySQL, and Microsoft SQL Server as the top three, but we do see that there is a rise in the NoSQL, in the non-relational databases, such as MongoDB and Cassandra. So what are the pros and cons for database testing? So data is an important asset in today's system. Some code, such as functions and procedures, are stored only in the database and are not accessible from external or even in the application itself. You can use it to quickly populate the database as part of your test, and you can also extract important tokens and information that can be used in your API or UI testing. On the cons, then scripting and query and database specific skills are needed. You need to understand whether you are testing the Oracle or the SQL, and you need to know how to query your database. Again, in similar to the API testing, then you are testing without a business context, which makes it harder to build the business flow. In several cases, there are systems where the databases are located on a different network, which means that it is not accessible for testing. And with the rise of the NoSQL databases, it makes it more complicated to access and to manipulate the data there. So we will now cover the best practices. So according to the last Forrester Wave for modern application functional test automation that was released this year, the best practice in today is to target 80% of functional test automation and to leave only 20% for manual testing. And for that, the Agile teams need to test at the API level. They also go on and recommend that you should ratchet down UI test automation in favor of API test automation, which means that 80% of your test automation needs to be replaced by API test automation. And now to our own best practices. So because the API is usually available early in the cycle, you should focus on testing it early in the cycle. And then once the UI is being stabilized, you should complete the UI coverage on the specific devices, browser, and operating systems only when they are stabilized. Another thing is that you shouldn't work on an empty system because your users are not working on an empty system. Your applications in production are already have lots of data in it, and you should also test it in the same conditions in your own lab. So you should populate it with your database testing and API testing, and only then you should continue with your UI testing. Each of your tests should be independent of other tests. It makes it better for investigation and for parallel execution. And it means that you can't rely on one result of a test for another test. So each step should be self-contained and not dependent on the other tests. You should use your API for the test setup and then continue with the UI testing for the core functionality only. Meaning that because of the UI execution is something that can take time, it user actions, it replays and runs on the real browser. So you don't want to run your entire flow with your UI. So for example, if you have a system that you need to first log in and then to add an item to the cart, and you are only testing the adding the item to the cart, then you should perform the login using the API and then continue with the UI and perform the core business logic of your test using the UI, and the same can be done for the teardown. You can then log out using the API and only focus on the core functionality with the UI. Because of today's rapid and fast deployment development, then you need to provide your feedback as fast as possible, which means that your test should run as part of your CI/CD, your continuous integration or continuous deployment process. Our best practice is that the entire suite should run for no more than a couple of minutes, and it will be best if you will test as part of the CI on the API level only, simply because it runs faster and you can provide, again, core functionality feedback as quickly as possible. If you have another, for example, nightly build that is running over the night, then you can run your complete suites that can also include the UI testing and the complete API testing at the night and then get the results. So you should combine between immediate feedback that should only cover the core functionality to the complete feedback that is being provided overnight, and then you get the report in the morning. So the HPE Advantage. In case you didn't hear, in the last Gartner Magic Quadrant for test automation, then Hewlett Packard Enterprise was announced as the leader. So it's mainly because of the coverage with the Agile practice and mobile application delivery. We have a comprehensive portfolio of integrated products and broad technology, and it is the market leader for package application, client server, mobile, and web application. And this, as you can see here, was released in less than a month in December 2015. Regarding our advantage in UFT, so in UFT you can easily combine each of the different tests of the different layers in one flow, meaning you can have a UI and then an API and then a database in the same flow, and you can benefit from each of the advantages of the different layers. In case you have a service that is not available, then you can virtualize it using HPE service virtualization, and then you will be able to continue with your own business logic and core functionality without being without having to wait for this service to become available. So, for example, if you're testing a shopping application and you need to integrate with PayPal, for example, so you can use service virtualization to integrate with PayPal, to virtualize your integration with PayPal, and then you won't waste time on that as part of your test. In addition, because we know that today's users are using your application from all over the world and on different network conditions, so you need to make sure that your application functions well on all of those different conditions. So by integrating with HPE network virtualization, you will be able to run your functional tests under different network conditions and make sure that your application functions well, not only in your lab, but also under real-world conditions. Because one of the mega trends of today is the mobile, and mobile is actually eating the entire world, then you can, with UFT's integration to HPE's mobile center, you can easily extend your test into the mobile world, and without having to learn any new language, you can simply continue testing in UFT and simply extend your lab into the mobile world. And as I already said, so in UFT we support over 30 different technologies, which makes it the complete industry standard solution for automation of web, mobile, API, and package applications. Okay, which now leads us to the live demo. So in the live demo, what I will present is a basic flow of how to test the UI of my application. I will then move to testing the API using the REST APIs of the system. I will show how you can access a MongoDB flow using UFT, and then we will finish with a complex flow which shows how I'm running the business flow using the API test, and then I'm validating it in the UI. But before I'm drilling in to the demo, then I think it's a good time to stop for any questions up till now.
Bernard?
Okay, yeah, we do have a question here.
Go ahead, Bernard.
And here we go. How user-friendly if we use only services without a GUI?
Okay, so maybe hi everybody. This is Yossi. So maybe I'll rephrase also this question. We're talking a lot about testing the APIs, and it seems to be something that is very hard and very not user-friendly. For sure from a non-technical perspective view, but that exactly is kind of the magic that you get from UFT using it. And as you will see going forward in the demo, we provide tools that you can expose your APIs in a GUI, very user-friendly interface, and without the need of getting into too deep technical issues, and therefore you can test your APIs in a GUI friendly manner, and you will see it through the demo in the upcoming minutes. Next.
Okay. And another question here is, the goal of testing is to meet customers' expectations. How can it be done on the API level when 90% of the users are business but not technical users?
Yeah, well, I think that is follows the previous questions, which means the users are non-technical users and they want to check their customers. The QA should check the customer's expectation, but the system that is being checked is built from a UI which is exposed to the user, but underneath that there's a big percentage of APIs. Now, if you as a tester can have validations on these services on the API level, as Ori already stated, a lot of pros. It's much more quicker, it's much more stable, and then you test your environment, your total system, in a much bigger variety of levels, and on more stable, etc. And of course, if an API is broken, then the UI will be also broken, because a query that you will do from the UI will not succeed if the underlying API service is been broken. So if you as a tester can find that problem, can find that defect on an early stage, it will be cost effective also from the UI perspective and from the business level.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. And we have one more here. Typically, QA engineers are not familiar with APIs. Do you see the developer doing the API testing?
Well, as I stated before, and it all becomes, it's all common, all these questions. No, there's no need for the developer doing the API testing. By the way, in the new world of development and in Agile, then yeah, we see that much more in developing groups, that the testers do run their unit tests, they do run their integration tests. But even if we're not looking at these kind of developing groups, when we're talking about a tool that exposes the API in a user-friendly manner, then this could be done even with the non-technical user using these APIs, even if you're not the developer. And I think it will be much more clear after seeing the demo and understanding what do we refer to.
Okay, great. That's all the questions we have for now. Let's get into the demo.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So I will now switch to my unified functional testing, my UFT. And as I said, we will start with a basic UFT GUI test. So I will create a new GUI test and I will give it a name. And I will create it. And I have several options where I can create my test, and I will select the most easy one, which is recording. But before I do that, let me show you an overview of my application. So this is my demo application. It's built with a NodeJS server, Express library. It has a REST API on the backend, and it has a basic HTML5 GUI where you can see here. So what this demo application can do is simply a flights management application. I have my list of flights. the location, the destination, the date, and the plane. And I can see these flights, and I can also add a new flight. So I will add a flight from Paris to London, and it will leave with a Boeing 757, and it will leave next month. And so that's it. So now I will press the add flight, and I see that my flight is being added. So this is my business application, and this is the flow that I'm going to test. So I will now close my application and open it with UFT record and run settings. So I will start my recording. UFT now opens my AUT because I defined it inside the settings, and I will now add another flight very similar to the one that I just did. So I will add Lisbon, and I want to get to Paris, and the plane would be a 737, and I want it to run to leave in February. And I will add the flight, and I see that throughout my test, UFT was able to record 8 different user actions. So I will now stop the recording and go back to UFT. So now I see that UFT created this script and recorded all of my actions, and now I can simply run it and make sure that it recorded correctly and my business flow was recorded like I wanted it. So we see that UFT, let's switch back to the demo application again. So we see that UFT added a second line with the same parameters, and I now can go back to UFT and take a look at the report. So here at the report, I see that I get the different steps. I see that at the beginning, we navigated to the home page of my application, and I see the different steps, and I see that everything passed correctly, and I'm good to go. So this was my basic UI flow. I will now go and open an existing API test, so I can show you how easy it is to test the API of my application. So before that, I want to show you one of the APIs of the application. Sorry. So I see here I have so this is one of my REST APIs, which gives me the method it gets flights, and I see that it's returning a JSON of my entire flight list. So now what I will do is I will perform the same business logic as I did in the UI using the REST APIs of the application. So in UFT, on the left part here as part of the toolbox, I have my activities. So in order to save time, I already defined this kind of activities before the webinar. So I have my flights resource, and it has 2 different methods. The one is the flight, and I will edit it so you can see it. So you see that it's a get, it's an HTTP GET request, and this is the URL, same as I just ran in my browser. It's flights, and it gets flights, and it doesn't get any parameters. So this is my first get flight method. And the second one, and this is what happens behind the scene when you press the create button. So if you remember, and I will go for a second to my UI. So once I press the add flight, this is the API that is being called behind the scene. So we see that it is a post HTTP method, and its relative is flight add flight, and it gets as parameters the from, to, and date and plane. The same exact details that are available in the UI. So I will now add this flow, and I have here, which I just added, which is the get flight, which is similar to the same functionality as the table that presents the list of flights. And I will now add the add flight, and I will simply change it to, instead of Paris, then I will change it to London. So this is my flow. I'm testing my application through the REST API, the service layer that is being exposed by my application. So I will now save my test. It's now compiling, as you can see on the bottom left part, to make sure that everything is done correctly. And now I can run my test. I will run my test. And as you can see here in the console, you will see the different requests and HTTP responses. So you see that the first HTTP was the get flights, and in a few seconds we will get the responses. So we see, sorry. Okay, so it's already finished. So let's go back for a second to the application, and I will press refresh to make sure that it was actually added. And I do see that my flow using the backend, I didn't access the UI of the application at the time, and it actually added this row from Madrid to London. So I tested the same functionality using the API of my application rather than accessing the UI of that. So, and here I get the report, and I can see the different HTTP requests. I see that the first request was a get, and then the second request was a post. And I can also take a look at the response body that was returned to me as part of this test. So we see again, this is a JSON, and in case I want, I can go over it and make sure that everything is there as expected. So the third layer is testing the database. So because this is a database that is MongoDB, and out of the box UFT doesn't come with support for MongoDB testing. So I will show you a short tip and trick on how you can easily test MongoDB and make sure that you access your MongoDB database using UFT. So what I did here is I created and used an activity, a default activity from UFT. Is called command line. It's part of the miscellaneous, and I added it here. And what it's doing, it's using a utility provided by Mongo, which is called Mongo Expert. And what I am doing is I'm exporting my entire database into a JSON file called flights.json, and this is the first step. On the second part, I will access it using UFT's file manipulation activity, where I will read the file that I just export and make sure that the word Madrid is being contained. And I know that it's already there because I just added it using my API. So here I have Madrid, and I will now run this flow and see that the database is being working as I expected. So you see, I have everything running, and you see that the Mongo export was executed correctly. And if I go, and I will see that the checkpoint, and here is the actual value, the actual JSON that UFT was able to read. And I do see by myself that it has the word Madrid in it, but I don't need to do it because UFT has already done it for me, and it made sure that the word Madrid is being contained in this JSON. So this is one of the ways that you can test your MongoDB and access it with UFT using a utility provided by MongoDB called Mongo Export. The same can be done for Mongo Import, where you can, instead of validating that data exists in your database, then you can simply enter data into the database and then checking it in the rest of the application. So the last flow that I'm going to show you is a complex flow. So I will open a complex flow where what I will do is I will run my business logic using UFT API testing. So here in this step, what I am doing is I am adding a flight from Zurich to Paris. And what I am doing in the last step is I am validating using UFT's GUI test the fact that the value Zurich really exists in the table. So I'm getting the flights using the REST API. I am adding a flight from Zurich to Paris using this API, and then I am validating that it exists using the API, the UI of the system. So just a quick refresh here, just to show you that there is no Zurich to Madrid here, and sorry, Zurich to Paris. And I will now run the test, and let's see what happens. So UFT starts with the API. And now it will open the UI. And will validate that the value exists. Okay, so sorry, it already opened it here. And you can see really that a new row was added from Zurich to Paris. And I can also see it inside the report. So I see that at first I got all the flights and it passed correctly. I even added a checkpoint here, which I didn't show you, that validates the HTTP response. I added the flight from Zurich to Paris, and then I validated it and made sure that it exists inside the table. So I think that I want to do it again so you can see the flow. I will just close the browser so you can see it. But instead of Zurich, then let's fly from Athens to Paris and Athens to Paris. So I will now save my test. UFT compiles it for me. Now it's ready for run, and I will run it. And again, the flow will start by running the business flow, the business logic using the API, and then I will validate it using the GUI of my application. So now UFT opens the browser for me, and it validates that Athens really exists. And once everything is finished, I can go back to UFT and take a look at my report and see that it was really created. And you see that Athens was validated and existed in the table where I added it via the API of the system. So this was So this was the demo. We showed a Node.js application that exposes two REST API methods and connects to a MongoDB. We showed the basic UI testing flow. We then went on to the API testing flow and showed how you can access MongoDB in UFT using a utility called Mongo Export. And then we finished with a complex flow where I ran the business flow with the API testing and completed the validation with the UI testing. So this concludes our demo. I think it's again a great time for additional questions.
All right, thanks for that, Ori. Now we do have some more questions in here. So in an API, if there are multiple requests, like a GET and POST, is there a possibility to pass the parameters from the GET request to the POST request?
Yeah, well, hi, it's Yossi again. The answer is yes. Okay, there's a mechanism of passing parameters between activities, linking fields, a response of the GET, and putting it as a request for the POST. It's built in the system, yeah. So, answer is yes.
Okay, great. And does it support all the CRUD operations, such as POST, GET, PUT, delete?
Yep, so the answer for this is also yes, it does support all the CRUD operations for REST, where it be POST, GET, PUT, or delete. And in that also we support all the types of the body that you would like to use, whether it would be XML, JSON, text, or form. Each kind of that type is supported with a dedicated API, which in that API you can link between properties, you can add checkpoints on these properties. Yep.
Okay. And here's another one. What options are available for SAP?
Okay, so for SAP, we've got options both on the UI side of testing, the GUI testing, and also in the API testing. When we're talking about GUI testing, we've got dedicated, we've got familiarity with specific SAP objects, whether we're talking about SAP GUI or SAP Web, and even for SAP Fiori, SAP UI5, all the cutting edge objects for SAP are supported on the GUI layer. In the API test, we also have support for, you can work with iDocs, connect the system, query an iDoc, update an iDoc, and then of course you can combine, as already showed in the demo, you can combine between these two options of testing, of updating the service using the iDocs, and then going and validating it on the UI layer, or vice versa, creating some flow on the UI and then going and validating that your iDoc was updated as as needed. We can go on next. Yep.
All right, and can we use API scripts for load or performance tests?
Okay, that's also a very good question. So here in HPE, one of the big strengths is using the tools as a solution and not only the tool by itself. And this is also something that is possible. You can create a test, whether it will be a GUI test or an API test, and use it in LoadRunner or in PC. For GUI test, you can run it through LoadRunner using Vuegen, and also in the API test, there's a specific option to convert the API test to a load-enabled test, and then it can be runnable and could be edited from LoadRunner from the controller and also from PC. So yes, these integrations between the tools is something that is very powerful and something that we put a lot of thought and effort for being there for you as a customer. This is not only for load testing. This is also for monitoring. For instance, BSM can run API and GUI tests all together. Yeah. So thank you for this question.
Okay, great. Okay, we got time for like 2 more questions here. We'll use another one. It's oh, here's one for licensing. What is the licensing for these API testing features? Are these features included in the base UFT, or is there additional cost?
Okay, so also a good question, and the answer is it is included in UFT. Okay, so for a QTP license that was in the past, it was not included, but if you have a UFT license, you have the API test option for free. And if you have already UFT installed on your environment, then you can just go ahead and open it, create a new API test, and then you've got all the options of using the different kind of API technologies.
Okay, great. And last question here, due to time. Is it possible to add or modify the HTTP header under, like, for example, accept header and content type?
Yeah, so the answer is of course yes. Okay, you can parameterize, you can change the headers, you can add security tokens, security headers, REST. Our activities supports all kind of authentications, working with certificates, SSL, and all other kinds of authentication. This is true also for other technologies. For web services, for instance, a very thorough support for changing all the parameters and using all the standards that are available for web services.
Okay, great. And that's all the questions that we can fit in there. So let's just go ahead and go through here. Here's some additional resources for everyone. So you don't have to remember these exactly. Like I said, they're going to be sent on an email for you, as well as they're going to be available on the Vivid website for this. It's the try us, so you can give it a try on UFT at that URL. Also have social media available. HPE is all about the apps blog, and HPE's functional testing solutions on LinkedIn. Plus, there's also the YouTube channels for this, for the UFT, where you can get into cross-browser testing, get integrations, web to mobile, and more. All right, next slide. All right, and thank you for attending. And this webinar was brought to you by HPE and Vivid Worldwide. So there's our links there as well to go to our sites. And you can sign up with Vivid if you're not a member and be able to join a chapter or a special interest group that has to do with testing or any of the other functions of using HP software. And just a reminder that the webinar recording and the slide deck will be posted on the Vivid website. In the next few days, you should be receiving an email for those links. So thank you very much for attending, and have a great day.